The siege of Barbarous begins. In 13M31, a vast loyalist armada broke from the warp into the Barbarous system, spearheaded by Lionel Johnson's Gloriana-class battleship, the Invincible Reason. Alongside the fleets of the Dark Angels sailed the warships of the Raven Guard and the Space Wolves, led by their Primarch Leman Russ. The Loyalist Armada smashed through the scant few remaining Death Guard warships that stood in defense of their homeworld to obliterate the inner system defense platforms and orbital stations and, at last, reach Barbarous's orbit. Swarms of Death Guard Stormbirds and Thunderhawks rose from the planet's surface to mount futile attack runs in a desperate bid to give their brothers on the ground time to prepare for the coming invasion. But they were swiftly shot down by massed formations of interceptor craft launched from the bays of Raven Guard cruisers. Sheltering behind the multiple layers of void-shielded defenses, the Death Guard and their allies looked up as the pale sun of Barbarous was eclipsed by scores of falling drop pods and swarms of orbital landing craft that brought the wrath of 2 Primarchs and warriors from 3 loyalist Space Marine legions. Reaping what was sown in 13M31. The crusade of vengeance against the traitor legion's home planets that would come to be known as the Passage of the Angels came to the adoptive home of Mortarion and the Death Guard. The defenders of Barbarous had no illusions as to the certainty of their fate. The forces arrayed against them were the rival of any expeditionary fleet of the Great Crusade. Yet their own strength was no trivial thing. A garrison of grim Death Guard, shattered but unbroken force of Iron Warriors and an ambassadors of Horus's own Sons of Horus Legion stood their ground against the fury of the Lion, the Wolf King, and the Raven Lord. Such a confrontation could only end in extermination, but the toll upon the Loyalists was great. This was the homeworld of the Reaper and his grim 14th Legion, and they would not sell it cheaply. The Primarchs of the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves had made planetfall, but if the traitor forces were to lose Barbarous, then perhaps cutting the head from one of those legions would balance the scales. While the forces of the Lion and the Wolf King arrayed themselves upon the plains of Orthria, full of rage and vengeance, the Raven Guard made ready their aircraft and jump troops. The Gene Sons of Corvus Corax had neither the numbers of their allied legions nor their thirst for blood. Their goal was not to make an example of the traitor legions, but to end the conflict swiftly and decisively. Amid the toxic smoke of the crash site, the forces of the Loyalist attackers surged towards the massed lines of the traitor sortie. A broad line of Loyalist armor and Dreadnoughts pounded the defensive emplacements with lass, bolt, and missile fire, and from within the armored hull of his Land Raider Spartan, Leman Russ emerged. Eager to heap vengeance upon the Sons of Horus for their part in the Wolf Cull on Yaren III, the Primarch of the Space Wolves and his Tartaros armored Hearth Guard hurtled towards the ranks of Sea Green legionaries. Yet at the last moment, the Sons of Horus withdrew, their bolters hammering into the ranks of the Space Wolf Terminators as the gap left in the traitor lines was filled by the stalwart advance of the Death Guard. As the traitor forces hurled bolter fire, chem munitions, and a barrage of ordnance at the Falca Fenrica, the first Primarch and his inner circle knights brought their swords to the War Master's Gene Sons. Cutting deep into the center of the traitor lines, the Dark Angels made good their oaths of vengeance and censure. The presence of 2 Loyalist Primarchs, fighting only paces apart, was enough to shake the resolve of even the fatalistic Death Guard. None dared approach, for to do so was to meet certain death. Yet to withdraw would only invite chase from the Wolf King, becoming prey for the most feared of predators. Castellan Praetor Vroghorn, master of the Barbarous garrison, knew that such hesitation could cost the traitors their opportunity to retaliate should it be allowed to fester too long. Taking up his relic war axe, the Death Guard Castellan broke ranks and charged the Space Wolves Primarch. Their moment of indecision broken, the defenders' lines surged toward the Loyalists, enveloping Russ. The Death Guard's charge was not without some success. They cut down the last of the Tartaros Terminators who accompanied Lehman, leaving him to stand alone on the battlefield, at least for the moment. As the ponderous Terminators made their retreat, two among their number dragged a bloody figure through the mud. Castellan Praetor Vroghorn lived, but only just. Grievously wounded, the Death Guard commander clung to life with the grim tenacity of his legion. Agents of the Lion's final sanction against the Death Guard homeworld, the Interrupters of the Dark Angel's Dreadwing, were deployed to every war zone on Barbarous. Upon the plains of Othria, a squad of these grim annihilators was dispatched to render the traitor forces to naught but ash and dust. As they advanced into the enemy lines, they were met by the dour Iron Warriors holding ground before the Bastion's Void Shield generator. The whole of the Horus Heresy played out in that moment amongst a hell of superheated plasma gas and the cracking boom of the Iron Warriors' shrapnel shells. The warriors of what had once been brother legions cut each other down. The badly wounded Death Guard Praetor made his way through the Bastion's underground network of tunnels, past defensive redoubts, and through choke points until he arrived at the munitions control node. He had been dragged to the Bastion gates by the remaining members of his cataphracti retinue before they turned and met the vicious charge of Leman Russ. They had brought Vroghorn the time he needed to arm the grim payload that awaited the Loyalists. The brother Primarchs pushed on towards the Othrian Bastion, the way of their advance cleared by Arcus warheads, storm cannon shells, and searing las, neutron and volkite beams. As they approached the entrenchments before the Bastion gates, a rumbling tremor shook the battlefield. A moment later, the muddy earth erupted upwards in a series of massive explosions. In a final act of spite, the Death Guard Praetor had detonated the chemical payload housed within the depths of the Bastion. Caustic fire and choking chem smoke belched thickly from craters across the Loyalist lines, momentarily throwing warriors from the three attacking legions into disarray. Yet the Lion and the Wolf King could taste victory and would not let it slip from their grasp. With sharp commands, the Primarchs drove their legions onward towards the enemy fortification. In their wake, they left only devastation. The Dark Angels and Raven Guard armor picking off the remaining stragglers of the traitor forces. With their leadership broken and their traps sprung to little effect, the traitors' defense of Barbarous was collapsing. Dour Iron Warriors held the Void Shield generator that protected the Bastion from orbital bombardment, as well as the Bastion gates, but their numbers were dwindling, and they were surrounded by enemy units from all three of the attacking Loyalist legions. Those defending the gates made vain attempts to hold back the combined assault of Lionel Johnson and Leman Russ, but even with the injuries the Primarchs had received, the Iron Warriors were cut down in mere moments by the angry demigods. With the defenders' desperate sortie smashed aside, the Loyalists had claimed victory over the plains of Othria and stood ready to breach the Bastion. Like Fulgrim's homeworld of Chemos, Barbarous was doomed to fall the passage of the Angels. The fury brought to Mortarion's foster world was beyond the defenders' capacity to withstand. With bastions and subterranean bunkers breached across the planet, Loyalist strike teams purged the vaults housing the Death Guard's remaining chem arsenal before collapsing the fortifications with graviton bombs and seismic charges. When the last of the Loyalist forces had returned to their orbiting void ships, the orbital bombardment began. A vast storm of planet-killing munitions hailed down from the Dark Angel's fleet, splitting the poisoned world asunder. As the conflict on Barbarus came to a close, the Primarchs looked to their next targets. The Lion and Leman Russ parted ways, carrying on their campaigns of vengeance against the traitors as they each saw fit. Russ's remnant fleet struck out to bring the Emperor's executioners to traitor forces located close to the galactic core. The Lion's main force made its way toward the Spinward West, smaller Dark Angel splinter fleets enacting their Primarch censure throughout the region. In their wake, the shattered remains of fallen Barbarus hung in the void, silent as the grave. The destruction of Nuceria in 13M31. During the Siege of Terra, Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels Legion, received a shared vision with his traitor brother Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, of the extermination of Nuceria, Angron's hated homeworld. Its already shattered and depopulated remains were utterly destroyed and wiped from existence by an orbital bombardment commanded by the fleet of Lionel Johnson and his vengeful Dark Angels. The news of Nuceria's destruction renewed the hope of the besieged Loyalists, as this meant that the forces of the Dark Angels, Space Wolves, and Ultramarines were finally en route to reinforce the besieged throne world.